At a hidden academy where magic is alive and danger waits in every shadow, a fireborn girl discovers power, desire, and a bond she cannot escape, with a girl who could either save her, or destroy her. The rain had been falling all afternoon, drumming on the slate roofs of Brackenmere like some impossible heartbeat. Elara Vale walked through the village streets with her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her threadbare coat, the mud sucking at her boots as if the earth itself were reluctant to let her go. She kept her head down, shoulders curved inward, like a question mark trying not to be noticed. That was the way of the world here, quiet, polite, suffocating. And Elara had long since learned that to stand out was to invite a gaze that burned colder than the wind. Her aunt's house, a squat, crooked structure perched between the clock tower and the marshlands, smelled of damp wood and old lavender. Inside, the fire in the hearth had dwindled to a thin whisper of embers, and the shadows in the corners seemed to lean closer, waiting for her to disappear entirely. She didn't belong in this room, this house, this life. Not that anyone here would have noticed. Brackenmere had a habit of swallowing children whole and spitting them back broken. It was the ruin that drew her out that night, though she didn't know why. The old glassworks on the edge of the marsh had been abandoned for decades, its dome of glass shattered, its bricks blackened by fires that had long since died. The villagers spoke of it in whispers, warning children that the place was cursed, that the stones themselves remembered the greed of those who had built it. That was exactly why Elara went there. She had always been drawn to the things people were afraid of, not for courage, but because fear mirrored her own. By the time she reached the ruin, the sky had darkened into a roiling smear of gray and black. Rainwater pooled in the hollows of the broken glass floor, reflecting the fractured moonlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Elara stepped carefully, listening to the hollow crunch of glass beneath her boots, and allowed herself to feel the anger she had carried all week. The market had been especially cruel that morning. Whispers followed her like a second skin. They said she was strange, dangerous. That she didn't belong. And she didn't deny it. In the center of the ruin, she stopped. The wind snatched at her hair, plastering it to her face, and she raised her hands instinctively. They were trembling, but not from cold. Something had been building in her for months, a fire she couldn't name. She had tried to push it down, to pretend it wasn't there, to stay invisible. But tonight, invisible had become unbearable. "I hate this," she whispered, voice barely carrying over the wind. "I hate all of it. I hate that they look at me like I'm broken. I hate that I can't make it stop. I hate that I feel." Her words were swallowed by the night. And then it happened. It started as a warmth in her chest, low and insistent, like a heartbeat she could feel in her bones. Her hands shook, and a pulse of light flickered over her fingertips, so faint at first she thought she imagined it. But the light grew, climbing her arms, spreading across her palms, and the glass beneath her feet began to soften, melting into liquid silver. The warmth became a roar. Symbols, intricate and circular, etched in fire, flared across her skin, coiling around her wrists, her forearms, her shoulders. Elara screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of release, of recognition, of something ancient waking inside her. The air vibrated with power, humming with a resonance that seemed both part of her and entirely alien. She felt the stones beneath her shift, the broken shards of glass rearranging themselves in ways that made no sense. A silver arc of molten light arced toward the sky, then coiled back toward her like a living thing, bending to her will even though she had no idea how to wield it. And then the world answered. The bell rang. It was distant at first, almost imperceptible. A single, deep note that rolled across the marshes and through the village, cutting through the storm. It resonated in her chest. It resonated in her bones. And when it struck the ruin, the fire in her hands danced in sudden recognition, surging higher, brighter, as if the bell had awakened it. Elara fell to her knees, rain plastering her hair to her face, arms trembling, eyes wide. She didn't understand what had just happened, and she didn't know if she wanted to. All she knew was that she felt alive in a way she had never known, dangerous, powerful, visible. And terrifyingly, impossibly, alone. But she would not be alone for long. By dawn, 3 women were standing at her aunt's door. They moved like shadows that had learned to take human form, silent and impossible to ignore. They were tall, their coats stitched with sigils she did not recognize, their eyes sharp and knowing. One of them stepped forward, the bell still echoing in the distance. "You have been summoned," the tallest said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "To Aurelian Academy." Elara's heart caught. She didn't know what it meant, what Aurelian Academy was, or why they had come for her, but something in their gaze told her that this night, this fire, this impossible moment, was the beginning of everything. She looked back at the ruin one last time. The melted glass was cooling into shapes that no longer seemed broken, but deliberate, as if the world itself had shifted to accommodate her. She didn't understand why she had survived. She didn't understand why the fire had chosen her. But for the first time in her life, Elara Vale felt like she belonged somewhere, even if that place was dangerous, forbidden, and unknown. And so she stepped forward. Elara had never traveled beyond the marshes that cradled Brackenmere, and certainly never under the shadow of such urgency. The 3 women who had come for her, the ones stitched with runes, whose eyes glimmered with quiet authority, did not speak another word as they guided her along winding stone paths she had never seen before. Rain had ceased, leaving the world slick and glistening, and yet the air hummed with a tension she could feel pressing against her chest. It was as though the night itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. The journey was silent, save for the low thrum beneath her boots, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the pulse she had felt when the fire had awakened. The tallest of the 3, whose voice had summoned her to life, moved at a measured pace, her coat flaring around her ankles like shadowed wings. Elara's curiosity burned hotter than the fear threatening to coil in her stomach, but she dared not ask questions. She had learned early that questions in Brackenmere were often answered with cruelty. When the path opened onto a plateau above a churning lake, Elara gasped. Mist swirled like liquid silk around black stone towers that rose impossibly from the cliffside, their surfaces etched with runes she could not read. The academy unfolded before her, a living thing that had waited centuries in patience, tethered to the world by glowing chains of light that quivered and pulsed. She could feel the magic of the place, low and resonant, as though it had been calling her from the moment she had been born. "This place," she whispered, unsure if the sound would even reach the ears of her escorts. "It's alive." The tallest woman turned, her gaze sharp yet not unkind. "Aurelian is not alive. It is aware. And it has been waiting for you." Elara's stomach tightened. Waiting for her? She was just a girl from Brackenmere who had survived a fire. That was hardly a reason for towers of stone to tremble in anticipation. The other 2 women stepped forward now, moving with the fluid grace of those accustomed to command. "You are unusual," said one with hair as black as spilled ink, her voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "Dangerous, yes. But not yet fully realized. That is why you have been summoned. You have been marked by fire, and fire does not answer to the weak." Elara swallowed, heart hammering. The words made sense in some instinctual way she could not name. The fire had chosen her. That much she knew. But she was not ready for the world that had chosen her in return. "Summoned for what?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "For learning. For control. For survival," the 3rd woman said, a figure robed in violet threads that shimmered like the surface of the lake below. Her eyes held a soft, terrible power. "And for the dangers that will come. The world is not as it seems, Elara Vale. Magic does not answer to everyone. Only to those strong enough to wield it, and only if they survive the call." Elara tried to comprehend, tried to imagine a world in which she could wield what had erupted inside her like a storm. But it was impossible. She had been trained to fear herself, to fear every spark that might break the quiet expectation of normalcy. This place, these women, spoke in a language she barely understood. Yet, deep down, beneath the fear, she felt a stirring of something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope. The next hours passed in a strange blur. A carriage, black and glimmering with runes of protection, appeared at the edge of the plateau, waiting silently for her. The three women escorted her inside. Its interior was warm, glowing softly from lanterns that floated without hands, casting gentle light across the polished wood. The seat beneath her seemed to mold itself to her shape, and the air vibrated with an energy that both unnerved and excited her. "You will not be harmed, not here," said the tallest woman, Maylis Thorn, introducing herself for the first time. "But neither will you be protected from the consequences of your choices. Everything you do here will matter. Every spark of anger, every surge of desire, every thought you allow to take form, it will shape you, and the world around you." Elara wanted to argue, to deny, but no words came. Her mouth felt dry. She had spent 16 years learning how not to be seen, how to disappear, and now the world had thrown her into its glare. And she had survived the fire. Hadn't she? The journey was long, though she could not tell how long. Time felt stretched, elastic, suspended between the sound of the wind against the carriage and the thrum of the Academy's power waiting for her. When they finally arrived, the carriage doors opened onto a landing carved from black stone, flanked by towering sentinels of metal and glyphs. The lake below shimmered with silver reflections, the chains of light tethering the Academy to the cliffs like some impossible, breathing organism. A single word rose in her mind as she stepped onto the stone: awe. And then she saw her first student. Rowan Ashfell leaned against a column at the far end of the landing, her arms crossed, the faintest smile playing at the corners of her lips. Dark hair tumbled over her shoulders in wild curls, a single streak of silver catching the lantern light. Her eyes were sharp, alert, and unwavering, the sort of eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, and yet still dared to challenge the world. Rowan did not move toward her. She did not speak. But the gaze alone was enough to make Elara's chest tighten in a way she could not explain. "She will be interesting," whispered the woman who had guided her here. Elara did not reply. She only stepped forward, feeling the air hum, feeling the fire in her veins pulse in rhythm with something larger, something older. She had survived the ruin of glass and flame. She would survive this place, too. She would learn. And maybe, just maybe, she would discover why the fire had chosen her, and why it seemed to answer to something in Rowan Ashfell, too. Inside the Academy, Elara was met with rituals and tests she did not yet understand. The walls were alive with runes that responded to emotion, archways that whispered warnings, and floors that rippled if one dared to tread lightly. A master of ceremony approached, her eyes sharp and assessing, and placed a hand on Elara's shoulder. "First, we see what you carry," she said. A wordless incantation passed from her palm to Elara's. Symbols appeared across Elara's arms, glowing faintly, coiling in ways both frightening and beautiful. The energy of the Academy bent around her, welcoming her, judging her, measuring her. And Elara understood, finally, that she had been marked not only by fire, but by destiny. The Academy waited. The fire within her waited. And in the distance, Rowan Ashfell's eyes followed every movement, every heartbeat, every flicker of unspoken emotion. Something was beginning. Something older than the towers, older than the mist, older than any of them. And it had chosen Elara Vale as its first spark. Elara had imagined magic schools in a dozen ways, from the quaint, orderly halls of storybooks to the grand towers of whispered legends. But nothing had prepared her for Aurelian. It did not simply sit on the cliffside above the churning lake, it rose, unfurling itself from mist and rock as if it had been waiting for her step onto its stones. Black towers stitched with runes twisted skyward, some spiraling impossibly, others branching like living trees. Chains of glowing light tethered them to the cliff's edge, pulsing softly, as if the Academy itself were breathing. Her heart pounded not just from awe, but from the lingering echo of the fire in her veins. Every step she took, the stones seemed to shift beneath her boots. The air hummed with low, constant energy, a resonance that pressed against her chest and whispered, "You belong, you belong, you belong." "This way," said Maylis Thorn, the tall woman whose eyes seemed to see through shadows and into bone. Her boots made no sound as she led Elara through the arching gates, inscribed with sigils that shimmered faintly as though alive. "We begin with your resonance." Elara's stomach tightened. Resonance was the Academy's way of sorting, not by ability alone, but by the very heartbeat of one's magic. The halls whispered that some girls could burn, some could shatter, and some could hold the world itself together. And some could do all three. As they walked, students moved around them. Every girl seemed impossibly distinct, each carrying a pulse of magic that thrummed visibly around her like the aura of some living star. Some wore gowns embroidered with glyphs that shifted with their moods, others carried staffs or wands that glimmered like captured lightning. Yet despite the grandeur, Elara felt their scrutiny immediately. The Academy had heard of her arrival. Whispers cut through the halls like knives. The girl from Brackenmere, fireborn, untested. Rowan Ashfell appeared suddenly, as if drawn from the shadows themselves. She leaned against a column of black stone, arms crossed, one boot tapping rhythmically on the floor. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, the faint scar across her jaw catching the lantern light in a way that made Elara's chest ache. Rowan didn't speak. She didn't need to. Maelys led Elara into a circular chamber at the heart of the Academy. The walls were lined with crystals that refracted the dim light into a kaleidoscope of colors, and the floor bore etched sigils that responded to Elara's presence, glowing faintly with every step she took. The ceiling opened to the night sky, stars twinkling as if they too were watching, and a low hum vibrated through the air, the heartbeat of the Academy. "You will stand in the center," Maelys instructed. "We measure the rhythm of your magic, the depth of your fire, and the way your energy interacts with the world around you. Your resonance will determine your path, and your circle." Elara nodded, feeling the fire stir again, restless and impatient. She stepped forward, trying to steady her breathing. But as soon as she placed one foot on the sigils, the symbols reacted violently. Light flared, coiling around her legs, crawling up her arms, her hair standing on end as sparks leapt from her fingertips. "Control," Maelys warned. "Control, or it will control you." Elara swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She remembered the ruin, the glass melting beneath her, the fire that had answered her despair. This was not fear. This was not anger. This was her. And she would not let it be caged. The symbols pulsed in response to her determination, brightening and fading with her heartbeat. She felt them wrap around her like a cage and a cradle at once, and then a presence brushed against her magic, sharp, electric, undeniable. Rowan. Her chest tightened. The connection was instantaneous, a current that ran through her veins and ignited something she did not yet understand. Rowan's magic reached toward hers, subtle, probing, teasing, like a question without words. Elara felt the fire in her respond, bending toward Rowan in a way that frightened and thrilled her. Maelys's voice broke through her awareness. "Enough." She stepped closer, placing her hands over the swirling energy. Light dimmed slightly, coils settling into a calm rhythm. "You are exceptional. Unbound by expectation, which is both a blessing and a danger. Cinderbound will be your circle." Cinderbound. The name alone carried weight. The circle for the powerful, the volatile, the ones who could burn the Academy to the ground if left unchecked. Elara's stomach twisted. This was not an honor. It was a warning. Rowan stepped forward then, her dark curls brushing her shoulders as she studied Elara with something like curiosity, or calculation. "Cinderbound," she murmured, almost to herself. "Huh. They're brave to place you there." Elara's heart leapt, part fear, part thrill. "Or foolish," she whispered. Rowan's smile was thin, sharp, and dangerous. "Maybe a little of both." The days that followed were a whirlwind of motion and sensation. Lessons in elemental manipulation, wards, incantations, and the weaving of magic into forms tangible and lethal. The Academy challenged her in ways Brackenmere never could. The fire within her responded to frustration, joy, and every pulse of desire she refused to name. And Rowan was always there. Sometimes in the same class, often in the periphery, leaning against a wall or balancing on the edge of a balcony, watching, waiting, her presence like a spark brushing against raw powder. It was not friendship. Not yet. But it was something. Something that pulled at her attention, made her heartbeat stutter, made the fire inside twist in ways both exhilarating and terrifying. One evening, after lessons had ended, Rowan appeared at the edge of the training yard. The sun was setting, turning the sky a bruised purple, reflecting in the lake far below the cliffs. She leaned casually against the black stone parapet. "You," Rowan said, voice soft, teasing. "You burn too brightly to pretend you're invisible." Elara's throat went dry. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The fire inside her answered instead, flickering along her arms, brushing against the air like a whisper. Rowan's eyes caught it. And in that gaze, in the pause between them, Elara understood something she had not admitted even to herself. She had never wanted anyone like this before. Not like this. Not someone who made her fire respond, someone who made the pulse of her heartbeat feel dangerous and sacred at the same time. And Rowan, somehow, understood it too. The academy loomed around them, silent, alive, waiting. It had been expecting this. The fire had been expecting this. And for the first time, Elara felt that the world beyond Brackenmere might not be a place of judgment and fear. Perhaps it could be a place where she could finally belong, if she survived the flames, and if she could navigate the dangerous pull of Rowan Ashfell. The wind at Aurelian was always colder than anywhere else, slicing through the stone corridors and curling into the bones of those unprepared. Elara had learned to move with it, letting it guide her, but it was different now. It seemed to respond to her, brushing against her hair and skin with intelligence, as though testing her. She had survived the fire at Brackenmere, but the fire here was different, disciplined by the academy, and infinitely more demanding. Rowan Ashfell had become impossible to ignore. She moved through the halls like she belonged to every shadow and every stone, leaning against walls, watching students practice, observing teachers with a curiosity that bordered on dangerous. Her presence was magnetic, her attention selective, and Elara could not stop noticing how the tips of Rowan's fingers seemed to glow faintly when she touched anything magical. Today, Rowan was leaning against a pillar in the training yard, arms crossed, eyes following a group of students as they struggled to manipulate floating orbs of light. She didn't look at Elara at first, only when Elara's fire flared unexpectedly, a small spark leaping from her wrist, did Rowan's gaze find hers. "That's it," Rowan said softly, a wry smile on her lips. Finally, some sparks worth watching. Elara froze, heat rushing to her cheeks. It wasn't intentional." Rowan pushed off the pillar, walking toward her with an easy, dangerous confidence. "Intentional or not, it's there. You can't hide it. And I wouldn't want you to, even if you tried." Elara swallowed hard, the fire in her arms responding to the proximity of Rowan's presence. It wasn't just magic, it was something deeper, something that made the hairs on her neck rise and her pulse drum in ways she didn't fully understand. "You've got raw power," Rowan continued, circling her slowly like a hawk assessing prey. "But raw power without control is dangerous. Even for the academy. Even for you." "I'm learning," Elara said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Rowan tilted her head, observing her with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Learning takes more than lessons. You have to survive yourself first. That fire of yours, it's not just magic. It's you. And sometimes, you are reckless." Elara wanted to argue. She wanted to defend herself. But she knew Rowan was right. The fire had responded to her emotions in ways she didn't fully understand, and each misstep left her drained, scared, exhilarated. Survival here meant more than training, it meant mastering herself. "You're not like the others," Rowan said, her voice softening for the first time. "Most girls try to hide their spark. You let it burn. That takes courage. Or madness. Maybe both." Elara wanted to speak, to ask who Rowan really was, to ask why she felt so drawn to her presence. But no words came. Instead, the air between them pulsed faintly, almost alive, as if acknowledging the unspoken bond forming in the space between two girls who carried storms in their veins. The lessons at Aurelian were relentless. Each day brought new challenges, wards that bent reality, elemental manipulation, illusions that preyed on fear. Elara's magic responded to her emotions, flaring in ways that terrified her instructors and fascinated her peers. Sparks danced across her arms when she felt anger, shivered along her spine when she felt fear, and rippled through her chest when she felt desire she could not yet name, and certainly could not yet understand. Rowan was always nearby, sometimes guiding, sometimes observing, always pushing Elara to the edge. She had a talent for reading people, for understanding magic in ways that made others feel exposed. And yet, she never judged. Only tested. Only watched. Only waited. One afternoon, Rowan pulled her aside during a break in lessons. They walked together along the cliffside, the wind tearing at their hair, the lake below roiling in shades of silver and gray. "You need to feel it," Rowan said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Not fight it. Not hide it. Feel it. That fire of yours, it's more than a weapon. It's a compass. It will tell you things you can't yet understand." Elara looked at her, heart hammering. "I'm afraid I'll hurt someone." Rowan's gaze softened, and she placed a hand lightly on Elara's forearm. The contact sent a jolt through Elara's body, a mix of fear, excitement, and something entirely new. "Then you'll learn. That's how we survive here. One spark at a time." The closeness was intoxicating, the warmth of Rowan's hand lingering like a promise. Elara's magic stirred in response, a coil of light flickering along her skin. Rowan noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're dangerous," Rowan said quietly, stepping back just enough to give them space, yet close enough that Elara could feel the pull. "And I like dangerous." Elara's lips parted, unsure if she should respond, but Rowan didn't wait. She turned and walked ahead, leaving Elara to follow, her mind a whirlwind of fear, exhilaration, and the first flickers of something she dared not name. That night, in her dormitory, Elara lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the academy hummed quietly around her. She could still feel Rowan's presence, lingering in the air like a shadow, like a spark waiting to ignite. The fire in her chest twisted with longing, curiosity, and a fear she couldn't yet define. Magic at Aurelian was a test of skill, of patience, of control. But Rowan was a test of something far more dangerous. Something that had nothing to do with spells or wards. And Elara had never been one to walk away from a challenge. The first test of her true power came on a morning thick with fog, the kind that made the towers of Aurelian appear to float above nothingness. The academy was silent except for the low hum of magic vibrating in the air, and the occasional crackle of energy from other students practicing their exercises. Elara's stomach churned as she followed Melis Thorne into the central hall, a vaulted chamber whose ceiling stretched impossibly high, the walls etched with glowing sigils that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "This is your resonance test," Melis announced. Her voice echoed through the chamber, soft but carrying a weight that made even the most confident student straighten. "Your magic responds to your mind, your heart, and your emotions. Today, you will see how much of yourself you carry into your power, and how much it carries you." Elara swallowed, her throat dry. The fire that had chosen her back in Brackenmere throbbed in her chest, restless, impatient, and she feared it might react before she was ready. She stepped into the center of the circle Melis had drawn, a series of concentric runes glowing faintly beneath her feet. "Focus," Melis instructed. "Feel it. Do not fight. Let it flow through you." Elara closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, attempting to calm herself. She imagined the glassworks ruin, the fire wrapping around her like a cloak, the heat surging in response to her anger and despair. It came back, the pulse, the rhythm, the undeniable force of her magic. She tried to tame it, to guide it, to hold it in her hands. And it laughed. The runes beneath her feet flared violently, glowing brighter than the lanterns in the hall. Sparks leapt into the air, forming arcs of silver that twisted like serpents. Elara's heart pounded as the magic she thought she controlled began to spiral. The light expanded, bright and blinding, wrapping around the columns, bouncing off the ceiling, reacting not to her commands but to the fear and frustration that bubbled inside her. Control. Melis shouted, stepping forward, her hands tracing runes in the air. But Elara was already lost, the fire inside her coiling and stretching beyond anything she had experienced. The walls of the chamber trembled. Cracks ran along the floor. Then, from the shadows, came a voice she knew instinctively. Elara. Rowan stepped into the chamber, moving with a confidence that belied the danger. Her presence alone seemed to shift the energy around her, grounding it, pushing and pulling it like a tide. Elara's pulse skipped. The fire in her arms, chest, and spine responded immediately, flaring brighter at Rowan's proximity. "You're overthinking it," Rowan said, voice calm, magnetic. "You're letting fear drive the fire. Let it breathe, don't cage it." Elara's breath caught. Let it breathe. She forced herself to focus on Rowan, on the steady, unshakable presence she had become, on the warmth that seemed to anchor her magic. Slowly, tentatively, she extended her hands, letting the energy flow outward rather than trying to command it. The sparks dimmed, the coils loosened, and the room settled into a low, humming rhythm, a heartbeat shared between Elara and the magic around her. The other students stepped back, eyes wide, but Rowan's gaze never wavered. She reached out, just barely touching Elara's forearm, and the connection between them was immediate, a tangle of light, power, and something unspoken. "You're stronger than you realize," Rowan murmured. "Stronger than you want to be." Elara felt a surge of emotion, something between pride and fear, and the magic responded, flaring again, not uncontrollably this time, but alive, vibrant, resonant. She could feel Rowan's power threading with hers, subtle and electric, teasing the edges of her awareness. And then it happened. A sudden jolt, a misstep, a flare of light too fast to control. One of the outer runes cracked, the wall near it splintering. Silver sparks scattered across the floor, igniting a ripple of uncontrolled energy. Students gasped, some ducking instinctively, but the fire did not strike them. It struck the ceiling, exploding in arcs of brilliant silver that reflected in Elara's wide eyes. For a moment, time slowed. The room glimmered with chaos and beauty intertwined. Then Rowan acted. She stepped into the center of the chamber, hands tracing protective sigils in the air. The coils of Elara's magic curved around her, almost as if recognizing a kindred spark, settling into patterns that calmed rather than destroyed. "Elara," Rowan said quietly, almost a command, and the fire obeyed, bowing, folding, and sinking back into controlled hums. The chamber was silent except for the low thrum of magic settling. Elara sank to her knees, trembling, exhausted, awestruck. "You're incredible," Rowan said, brushing a strand of hair from Elara's damp forehead. Her gaze was intense, assessing, almost too intimate in the closeness of the moment. "And you're reckless. Dangerous. But incredible." Elara swallowed, words failing her. The fire still pulsed faintly beneath her skin, but it felt different now, softer, more aware, tethered to her in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. And Rowan's eyes held something else, something unspoken, that made her chest ache. Melis's voice cut through their silent exchange, sharp and authoritative. "Enough." She stepped forward, placing both hands on a runic staff, and the hall's hum returned to its normal rhythm. "You have passed the first test, barely. Your control is fragile, but your potential is unmatched. Take this lesson seriously. Power without understanding will ruin you." But used wisely, she let the sentence hang, a promise and a threat. Elara's gaze flicked to Rowan, who offered a small, enigmatic smile. No words were needed. The connection between them had deepened, charged by fear, trust, and something that went beyond simple friendship. That night, as she lay in her dormitory, the glow of residual magic still faintly pulsing beneath her skin, Elara thought about what had happened. She had survived the chaos. She had faced her fire and lived. And she had not faced it alone. Rowan had been there, steady, guiding, untouchable and yet entirely present. Magic was dangerous. Rowan was dangerous. And Elara Vale was, for the first time, starting to feel alive in a way that terrified her. The fire in her chest twisted again, not with fear, but with the dangerous thrill of knowing that something profound had begun, a bond, a spark, a storm that could consume them both if not handled carefully. And Elara realized, with a thrill she could barely contain, that she didn't want to hide from it. The mornings at Aurelian Academy were never quiet. Even before the sun had risen above the cliffs, the air hummed with a low, insistent pulse, the heartbeat of magic awakening across the campus. Elara had grown used to it, yet every dawn still made her pulse quicken, a combination of fear, awe, and something she could not yet name. Today, however, felt different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks over the cliffs. The other students moved with brisk efficiency, their eyes occasionally flicking toward her and Rowan, whispering in low tones. Fireborn. Cinderbound. She had heard the words before, but today they seemed heavier, weighted with expectation. Melis Thorne stood at the head of the training yard, her robes catching the faint morning light, eyes sweeping the gathered students. She gestured, and the air shifted, shimmering with wards and glyphs that marked the bounds of the day's exercises. Today's lesson is not about magic alone, Melis began, her voice carrying over the courtyard. It is about control, resilience, and the scars we leave on ourselves when we overreach. You will each face a challenge tailored to your resonance. Some will endure fire, some water, some the twisting of reality itself. And some, she paused, glancing at Elara, will endure themselves. Elara's stomach nodded. She had survived fire before, literal fire, elemental fire, but this was different. Here, magic was more than flame or energy. It was alive, responsive, and it could hurt in ways she had not yet imagined. She tried to steady her breathing, but the hum of power vibrating through the courtyard made her hands twitch. Cinderbound, a voice said from the edge of the yard. Rowan had appeared silently, leaning against a stone column, arms crossed, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Ready to see how much of yourself you're willing to burn today? Elara bit back a nervous laugh. I'm not sure anyone's ready for me. Rowan's eyes glinted with amusement and something softer, almost a challenge. We'll see. The first exercise was elemental control. A sphere of fire floated before her, hovering in midair, tethered to the runes etched into the ground. She was to manipulate it, shape it, bend it to her will without letting it flare out of control. It was supposed to be simple. It was not. Her fire surged almost immediately, responding to every flicker of frustration, every pang of self-doubt. The sphere expanded wildly, flaring like a miniature sun, heat radiating in waves. Students gasped. Teachers shouted warnings. And Elara, heart racing, felt panic rise in tandem with the fire. Breathe, Rowan's voice cut through the chaos. She had stepped beside Elara now, one hand hovering near the sphere, not touching it, just there, steady, calm, grounding. Let it flow, don't try to cage it. Elara closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythm of Rowan's presence, on the pull of her magic threading with her own. Slowly, deliberately, she let the sphere respond to her intention rather than her panic. Sparks shot outward, but they obeyed her direction, forming arcs of silver that danced across the yard. It was beautiful. And terrifying. By the end of the exercise, her arms were raw, her palms blistered, her hair damp with sweat, but she had survived. More importantly, she had controlled herself without losing her spark entirely. Rowan gave her a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of triumph. But there was no time to celebrate. The next challenge was far more personal, a duel with her own reflection. The academy had ways of testing students that went beyond physical exercises. Mirrors of reality, enchanted to pull at memory, fear, and desire, reflected not what the eye saw, but what the heart feared. Elara stepped into the mirrored chamber, the air growing thick and heavy, the walls shimmering as though breathing. Her reflection appeared immediately, identical in every detail, except its eyes glowed with an intensity she had never seen in her own gaze. You cannot win, it whispered. And the voice was hers, twisted by fear and doubt. The reflection lashed out, magic crackling in arcs of silver and fire, forcing Elara to dodge, deflect, and counter. Every movement demanded everything she had: focus, control, and courage. One misstep and the shards of magical energy would tear the chamber apart. One misstep, and she could hurt herself. Exhaustion gnawed at her muscles. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to run, to hide. But Rowan's presence, just beyond the threshold of the chamber, anchored her. The memory of Rowan's voice, steady and teasing, reminded her that power was not just about force, it was about trust. Finally, she paused, taking a deep breath, letting the reflection meet her gaze without fear. The fire within her responded, folding in on itself, tethering, weaving, bending with precision. The reflection faltered, then shattered, leaving Elara alone in the chamber, trembling, bruised, but victorious. By the end of the day, the students were exhausted. Bruises and burns marked the diligent, and pride and relief glimmered faintly in tired eyes. Elara's hands were blistered, her arms raw, and yet she felt alive in a way she had never imagined. Rowan met her outside the chamber, leaning casually against the wall, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Not bad," she said. "I thought you might burn the place down." Elara managed a tired laugh. "I almost did." "You're reckless," Rowan said, stepping closer. "But I like it. Reckless people are alive. Careful people are dead long before they fall asleep." Their fingers brushed lightly, a spark igniting in the contact, and Elara felt the fire respond in ways both magical and painfully human. Heat pulsed through her chest. She realized that Rowan was more than just a guide or a rival. She was a force, unpredictable and magnetic, capable of both grounding her and setting her aflame. Elara's mind raced with unspoken thoughts, feelings she dared not name, as Rowan's eyes held hers with that dangerous, teasing intensity. The wind from the cliffs whipped around them, tugging at their hair, and the academy seemed to pulse in resonance with the fire in her veins. Magic left scars. Lessons left scars. And Rowan. Rowan left a kind of scar Elara wasn't sure she wanted to heal. The academy at night was a different world entirely. During the day, it was alive with energy, students, and the pulse of magic that responded to every heartbeat. But at night, it transformed into something older, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. Shadows moved like living things along the corridors, lanterns flickered with minds of their own, and the stone walls hummed faintly, as if whispering secrets they had carried for centuries. Elara had always been drawn to secrets. They called to her, threaded through her curiosity, her fear, and that restless fire that lived in her chest. Tonight, that fire guided her through the winding halls of Aurelian, with Rowan at her side. "We shouldn't be here," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the academy. Rowan's eyes sparkled in the dim light, the mischievous grin she wore impossible to resist. "That's exactly why we are." They walked in silence for several minutes, the corridors narrowing until they reached a spiral staircase that twisted down beneath the cliff. The air grew cooler, damper, carrying a faint scent of earth and water. Rowan stopped at a stone door, tracing her fingers over the carved glyphs. "This door isn't just locked," Rowan said softly. "It's waiting for the right hands, the right mind, and the right heart." Elara hesitated, unsure of what she felt: fear, anticipation, or something dangerously close to excitement. Rowan glanced at her, eyebrow raised, and without another word, the door shimmered and swung open, revealing a staircase that led downward into darkness. The library beneath the lake was a place few students had ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves carved from black stone, glimmering faintly as if infused with moonlight. Crystals hung from the ceiling, refracting the water above in shimmering patterns that danced across the walls. Books floated gently along invisible currents, their pages whispering secrets as the girls passed. Elara felt the familiar pull of magic, but it was different here, denser, older, alive with knowledge that predated even the academy itself. Her pulse quickened, the fire within her responding instinctively to the energy. Rowan led her to a table in the center of the chamber, where a single book lay waiting, bound in deep blue leather and inscribed with runes that glowed faintly. "The Twin Flames," Rowan said, voice hushed. "It's said to be prophecy, and warning. Only the Fireborn can truly read it." Elara swallowed. Twin flames? Rowan traced a finger along the glowing runes. Two magic souls, intertwined. One cannot exist fully without the other. The bond is dangerous, but also powerful beyond imagining. Elara felt the pull in her chest again, stronger this time, a warmth threading through her veins, responding to Rowan's presence in a way she couldn't ignore. Her breath caught. You mean, like us? Rowan's eyes held hers, unflinching, fierce, and something tender beneath the edge of mischief. Maybe. Maybe not. But the fire responds to connection, Elara. You felt it during the test. You felt it now. That pull, it's real. And it's not just magic. Elara's fingers hovered over the book, but she hesitated. There was a warning here, something that whispered danger, consequences, and yet, knowledge that called to her. She dared to open it, and the air shifted immediately, the pages glowing with silver light as if breathing. The book revealed diagrams, incantations, and stories of fireborn who had walked the academy centuries before. Some had risen to unmatched power, their magic entwined with another's. Others had been destroyed by it, consumed by their own spark or by the betrayal of their twin flame. Elara's heart pounded. Every page she turned felt like a pulse in her chest, a recognition of the fire she had tried to tame. Rowan leaned close, the warmth of her shoulder brushing against Elara's, and she felt the coils of energy within respond, wrapping around both of them, tethering them in a way that was dangerous, thrilling, and impossible to ignore. You feel it too, Rowan whispered, voice almost reverent. Don't fight it. Elara's hands trembled. The fire surged, not violently, but alive, responsive, recognizing Rowan's magic as if it belonged to her. It twisted in her veins, coiling around her ribs, her heart, her arms, not just energy, but desire, anticipation, and a fear she couldn't name. For the first time, she realized Rowan was not just a guide, not just a rival, not just a spark. Rowan was the mirror in which she could see her full power, and perhaps, the only person who could survive it. A sudden splash from above startled them, a ripple across the water, and the light from the crystals shifted. The magic in the room pulsed in warning. Elara felt her fire flare instinctively, protective, sharp. Rowan's hand found hers, grounding her, steadying the coils of energy that threatened to surge beyond control. You need to understand, Rowan said softly, her thumb brushing the back of Elara's hand. Magic like ours, it doesn't just exist. It demands. It demands honesty, trust, and sometimes, it demands risk. Elara's lips parted, but no words came. The tension between them was magnetic, the air thick with possibilities. The fire within her pulsed in tandem with her heartbeat, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the academy. Not the prophecy. Not the danger. Only the electricity that ran between them, impossible to ignore. And the library beneath the lake watched silently, ancient and knowing, as two girls stood on the edge of something that could either ignite the world, or destroy them both. The mornings at Aurelian had grown colder, and with them, a sense of scrutiny that Elara could no longer ignore. She had survived her first exercises, nearly destroyed a training hall, and glimpsed the deeper, dangerous magic hidden beneath the academy's stones. Yet today felt different. Whispers followed her down the hallways, quick, sharp, and tinged with curiosity, jealousy, and something darker. She had not yet seen her rival, but she knew from the way the students stepped aside, casting side glances, that someone had already marked her as a challenge. The first sight of her came in the library, where Elara had returned to study forbidden texts with Rowan. A tall girl with platinum hair and sharp, calculating eyes was leaning against a shelf, a book open in one hand while her other hand absently traced runes into the air. Magic pulsed faintly from her fingertips, controlled, precise, dangerous, the kind that could match fire with ice and never lose its shape. You must be the fireborn, the girl said, her voice smooth, low, and teasing. Elara Vale. The one who nearly destroyed the chamber yesterday. Elara's pulse quickened. I controlled it, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though she felt the pull of nerves twisting in her stomach. The girl's smile sharpened. Barely. She stepped closer, the air around her humming with authority. I'm Seraphine Kale. And I have a feeling, you and I will not be friends. Rowan, standing behind Elara, shifted slightly. Her hand brushed against Elara's shoulder, a quiet anchor in the sudden tension. Then you'd better learn fast, Rowan said, voice low, eyes fixed on Seraphine. Some of us survive the Fireborn, and some don't. Elara felt the spark of rivalry ignite in her chest. Seraphine's presence was like ice against her fire, precise and controlling, a challenge that made her own magic thrum in response. She wanted to prove herself, to show Seraphine that she was more than raw power, more than the girl who nearly lost control in the chamber. The challenge came sooner than expected. During the next training exercise, students were paired off for dueling practice, magic bending against magic, control pitted against control. Seraphine was chosen as Elara's partner. The courtyard fell silent as they faced each other. Sparks danced along Elara's arms in anticipation. Seraphine's energy radiated calm precision. They bowed to each other, eyes locked, and then the duel began. Elara's first strike was impulsive, a surge of fire that arced toward Seraphine. But Seraphine was ready, her hands tracing runes in midair, redirecting the flames harmlessly to the ground. A flicker of pride and irritation surged through Elara. This girl was good, almost unnervingly so. You can't just throw fire, Seraphine said, voice calm but laced with challenge. You need rhythm, intention, control. Rowan, watching from the sidelines, did not intervene. Her gaze was steady, encouraging, silently telling Elara to trust herself. Elara inhaled, letting the fire respond not to her fear or frustration, but to her intention. She felt Rowan's presence in the back of her mind, grounding her, steadying her pulse. She shifted her magic, shaping it into controlled arcs, twisting, folding, and spiraling toward Seraphine. The platinum-haired girl reacted immediately, parrying, but the sparks that hit her left traces, tiny scars of energy that lingered on her robes. Seraphine's eyes widened in surprise, and for a heartbeat, Elara felt the thrill of victory. But Seraphine smiled faintly, coldly. Interesting. Fire and restraint. You may survive longer than I expected. The duel ended with neither claiming full victory, but the tension remained. Seraphine had marked her as a rival, and Elara could feel it in the air, in the way the magic around them hummed, in the glances of other students, in the unspoken rules of power at the academy. Later that evening, Rowan found her in the training yard, the wind tangling their hair, the sky bruised with twilight. You handled her well, Rowan said, leaning against a column, casual but magnetic as always. Better than I would have thought. Elara shook her head. She's dangerous. I don't know if I'll be ready. Rowan's smile softened. She stepped closer, brushing a hand lightly along Elara's arm. You're ready. You just don't realize it yet. That fire of yours, it isn't just power. It's instinct, courage, and something no one else can touch. Elara felt the pull again, that magnetic tension between them, heightened by shared triumph, shared danger, and something electric that made her pulse race. Rowan's gaze held hers, steady, intense, intimate in a way that made her stomach twist. You feel it too, Rowan whispered. This pull. The fire. It responds to me, and I respond to it. Don't fight it. Elara wanted to say something, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she let the fire respond, twisting lightly around her fingers, teasing the air, coiling toward Rowan in recognition. The connection was brief but undeniable, charged with trust, desire, and a thrill that bordered on dangerous. As Rowan pulled back, the wind whipping around them, Elara realized something important. Surviving the academy wasn't just about mastering magic. It was about navigating trust, rivalry, and desire, and Rowan Ashfell was at the center of it all. The lake at Aurelian was alive. At least, that's how it felt to Elara the first time she stepped onto the obsidian stones of the cliffside, gazing down at its inky surface. By day it reflected the sky in quiet, glassy serenity. But at night it pulsed, whispering secrets in currents of silver light, alive with a power older than the academy itself. Rowan had insisted they go tonight, dragging Elara along despite the warning scrawled in every forbidden text she had read: "Do not go near the lake alone. Its waters remember. Its whispers seduce. Its currents demand." "You'll be fine," Rowan had said, that familiar mischievous glint in her eye. "It's just water. And I'll be right there. Don't overthink it." Elara, of course, overthought it. She always did. But the fire in her chest, stirred by Rowan's presence, pressed her forward, compelling her to follow, despite the hum of anxiety coiling around her. The edge of the lake was different from anywhere else in the academy. Silver currents traced invisible paths across the water, glowing faintly with magic that resonated with Elara's own. The air smelled of ozone, rain, and something unidentifiably ancient. Her pulse quickened as the energy pressed against her, and she felt the fire within coil and stretch, recognizing the lake as if it were alive, as if it knew her. Rowan was already at the water's edge, leaning casually against a jagged stone, eyes reflecting the shifting light. "There," she said, voice low. "It's beautiful, isn't it? And dangerous. Perfect combination for a fireborn." Elara's lips parted, unsure if she was speaking or just breathing. The lake thrummed, responding to her heartbeat. She could feel it in her veins, in the fire that had burned so wildly within her during her tests, in the pull that now threaded toward Rowan. "What is it?" Elara whispered. "Why does it feel like it's alive?" Rowan stepped closer, brushing against her arm. "Everything here is alive. Magic doesn't die, it waits. The lake, it remembers every fire, every sorrow, every spark that has touched it. Tonight, it wants to know yours." Elara's chest tightened. She wanted to step back, to retreat into control and caution, but the pull of the lake, and Rowan, was irresistible. Something whispered in the currents, and the fire in her veins surged in response, twisting along her arms, coiling around her heart. Rowan extended a hand. "Step closer. Let it whisper to you. Don't fight it." Elara hesitated, the water reflecting the night sky like shards of silver. Then, trusting Rowan, trusting herself, she stepped forward. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the currents responded, curling around her hands in gentle arcs, pulling at the fire within her. The water glimmered, forming images that swirled and shifted, fragments of memories she hadn't known she carried, flashes of power and fear intertwined, and something deeper, something she could not yet name. Her heartbeat raced, her fire twisting, brightening in ways that mirrored the lake's movements. Rowan's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, steadying her, and the energy pulsed in harmony, two forces intertwining, balancing, feeding each other. "You're stronger than you know," Rowan whispered. "And more dangerous." "I like that." Elara felt a jolt, not of magic, but of awareness, of connection. It startled her, thrilling and terrifying all at once. She realized that Rowan wasn't just her anchor, her guide, or her rival. She was part of the fire, part of the storm within Elara that had been growing since Brackenmere, part of the rhythm the lake now echoed back to her. The currents swirled faster, silver light reflecting across their faces, and the lake's whisper became a roar in her mind. Visions of the twin flames' prophecy flickered, fire entwined with another, unstoppable, consuming, and yet sustaining. Elara understood in that moment that Rowan was more than a spark, she was a flame she could neither cage nor resist. "I feel it," Elara breathed, trembling, the fire, the pull, everything. Rowan leaned close, her voice soft, almost reverent. "That's because it's real. You can't hide it. And you don't have to. Not from me." Elara's fire flared again, responding to Rowan, to the lake, to the night, and for a moment, all the fear, frustration, and uncertainty of the past weeks melted away. It was just them, magic, power, desire, and trust intertwined in a way she had never experienced before. Then the water shivered violently, sending ripples across the lake. Something beneath the surface stirred, a pulse far older and stronger than the academy itself. The currents wrapped tighter around Elara's hands, her arms, her chest. The fire coiled, responding, dangerous, alive, and Rowan's presence grounded her. "Elara," Rowan said sharply, hand tightening on her shoulder. "Focus. Don't let it take more than you can control." She nodded, breath catching, the fire inside her twisting and folding around the lake's power. Slowly, deliberately, she let it flow, merging instinct with control, instinct with trust. The silver currents calmed, the roar fading to a gentle hum, and the lake shimmered as if acknowledging her. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Only the wind and the distant cliffs whispered. Rowan's eyes held hers, unflinching, intense, and in that gaze, Elara understood, the fire was hers, the pull was theirs, and the lake had just borne witness. They stayed there long after, shoulders brushing, the night humming around them. Neither spoke, but neither needed to. The connection was complete, unspoken, dangerous, thrilling, a bond of fire and water, trust and desire, something that could ignite or consume them both. The halls of Aurelian Academy were rarely silent, but tonight they seemed to breathe. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, coiling around the carved columns and whispering faintly along the stone walls. Even the air smelled charged, ozone, magic, and something darker Elara couldn't name. Elara moved carefully, Rowan just behind her, each step deliberate, boots clicking softly against the black stone. They weren't supposed to be here. The academy had rules against wandering the upper wings after dark, but the warning signs had come too late. Seraphine. Elara had known the platinum-haired girl would not let their last duel rest in peace. Her glare during the evening lessons had been sharp enough to cut stone. And now, Elara knew, she had struck first. "Are you sure about this?" Elara whispered, voice tense. The shadows themselves seemed to twist closer. Rowan's expression was calm, teasing, dangerous. "I'm sure about you. And that's enough." Elara felt her pulse spike. The fire in her veins responded immediately, coiling and stretching like a living thing. Rowan's presence beside her steadied the rhythm, a grounding pulse amid the chaos of her own raw energy. The first signs of trouble came almost immediately. As they turned the corner into the main hall, a shimmering barrier appeared, faintly glowing red, looping across the stone floor in intricate patterns. Elara's pulse quickened. Wards, she realized. Protective, defensive, probably set by Seraphine. Rowan crouched slightly, tracing her fingers along the floor. "She's here. And she's testing us." "You're stronger than I thought," Seraphine said, voice almost admiring as she advanced again. "But you can't hold it forever. Even together, you're fragile." Elara felt the truth in that warning. The magic surged within her, responding to Rowan, to Seraphine, to the hall itself. She faltered slightly, and Seraphine's strike grazed the edge of her ward, a flash of silver biting the stone near her feet. Rowan's hand shot out, brushing against Elara's, grounding her instantly. The fire twisted and obeyed, folding around them both, responding to touch, intention, and trust. Elara realized, with a jolt, that she could not survive this without Rowan, not just physically, but emotionally, magically. Minutes stretched like hours, the duel pushing them to the edge. Sparks leapt across the hall, wards cracked and reformed, and the shadows themselves seemed to watch, alive with anticipation. Then, in a sudden move, Rowan and Elara executed an unspoken rhythm, a combination of fire and controlled pulses that sent Seraphine stumbling backward, the wards shattering around her. The hall fell silent. Silver sparks drifted lazily to the floor. Elara's chest heaved, her arms glowing faintly with residual fire, but she was exhilarated. Rowan's hand remained lightly on hers, their fingers brushing in a spark that wasn't magic alone. Seraphine straightened, lips curved in a thin, calculating smile. "Interesting," she said quietly. "You survive, for now. But I will not forget this." As she disappeared into the shadows, Elara realized something she hadn't before. Survival at Aurelian wasn't just about mastering magic. It was about alliances, trust, and timing. And perhaps most dangerously of all, it was about the pull between fire and flame, herself and Rowan. Rowan squeezed her hand gently, their connection lingering in the charged silence. "You did well," she whispered, voice low, intimate. "Stronger than I knew." Elara felt the fire coil in her chest, responding to Rowan's words, to her presence, to the electric tension between them. She wanted to speak, to say something she couldn't yet name, but she only nodded. Words weren't necessary. Not now. The shadows of the hall seemed to watch, silent and patient, as the first real tests of friendship, rivalry, and desire unfolded in the heart of the academy. And Elara understood, in a way that made her pulse race, that nothing here was simple, not the magic, not the rivalries, and certainly not the fire that Rowan Ashfell had ignited in her heart. The corridors of Aurelian Academy were quieter than usual that evening, the usual hum of magic muted under a heavy, expectant air. Elara moved cautiously, boots silent against the polished black stone, her senses stretched tight. The fire in her veins thrummed in rhythm with the energy that clung to the walls, wards, old and new, protective and punitive, whispering warnings to anyone who dared pass. Rowan walked beside her, calm, collected, the contrast grounding Elara's pulse as her fire coiled restlessly. "The wards are alive tonight," Rowan said softly, eyes scanning the hallway, tracing invisible currents of magic. "They remember everything that's ever happened here. And some of them don't like being disturbed." Elara's stomach nodded. "Then why are we here?" Rowan's grin was teasing, dangerous. "Because you need to understand them. And you need to understand yourself." They approached a section of the academy closed off to students, a corridor lined with gilded arches etched with glowing runes. The whispering wards, as Rowan called them, pulsed faintly along the walls, murmuring secrets and warnings that only those attuned to magic could hear. Elara reached out tentatively, letting her fingers hover near the carvings. The fire in her veins leapt at the energy, reacting with urgency, intertwining with the wards in ways she had never experienced. For a moment, panic flared, but Rowan's hand brushed hers, steadying her. "Listen," Rowan whispered. "Feel their rhythm, not their threat. Magic isn't just power, Elara. It's memory, intention, and sometimes, a conversation." Elara closed her eyes, inhaled, and let the wards speak. Their whispers were faint, layered, like echoes of the past, pulling fragments of history, tests, and warnings into her consciousness. She felt the fire respond, coiling in tune with the hum of the magic, twisting and folding around her senses. A sudden spark of recognition hit her, a pattern in the wards, subtle but deliberate. They weren't just protecting the academy. They were guiding, teaching, hinting at truths long hidden. Elara traced the runes with her mind, feeling the energy respond to her touch, and a thrill of power surged through her. "You're doing it," Rowan murmured, eyes wide. "You're speaking with them." But as the wards shifted under her influence, a shadow appeared at the edge of the corridor. Seraphine. Her eyes glinted with a cold, calculating light. "Impressive," she said smoothly, stepping closer. "But you shouldn't play with wards you don't understand. They bite. They punish. They remember." Elara's pulse quickened, fire coiling in response to both Seraphine and the wards. The energy in the hallway shifted, tense and alive, reacting to every heartbeat. Rowan stepped forward, hand brushing against Elara's arm. "Stay calm. Trust me." Seraphine raised her hands, fingers tracing a precise pattern in the air. Shadows leapt along the walls, converging toward them in twisting, writhing shapes. Elara's first instinct was to strike, fire leaping from her arms in arcs of gold, but Rowan caught her gaze. "Control it," Rowan said, voice steady. "Don't fight. Flow." Elara inhaled, feeling the wards beneath her feet, around the walls, responding to her heartbeat, her intention. She let the fire pulse, not strike, merging with the energy of the corridor, wrapping around the shadow Seraphine had unleashed. The tendrils of shadow hissed, twisted, and then dissipated, absorbed into the wards themselves, leaving Seraphine momentarily off balance. "You're learning," Rowan whispered, her hand still lightly resting on Elara's. "Faster than I expected." Elara felt the heat between them spike, not fire alone, but the magnetic pull, the thrill of shared power, trust, and something dangerously intimate. She realized, with a jolt, that Rowan's presence was no longer just a guide. It was part of her rhythm, part of the fire that had grown so wild inside her. Seraphine straightened, lips curved in a thin, dangerous smile. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You may be learning, but you're still untested." Rowan's gaze met hers, steady, intense, and impossibly close. "Then we'll be ready," she murmured. "Together." Elara's heart twisted, a mix of fear, exhilaration, and something she could not yet name. The wards hummed around them, alive and watching, as if acknowledging the bond that had formed, not just between fire and flame, but between two hearts willing to face the storm together. The night air was sharp with frost, carrying the scent of salt and stone from the cliffs beyond the academy. The moon hung low and full, its silver light spilling across the jagged landscape, turning every ridge and shadow into a stage for something ancient and powerful. Elara shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The fire within her pulsed with restless energy, coiling like a living thing, attuned to the rhythm of the world outside the academy walls. Rowan walked beside her, calm, confident, every step measured, her presence steadying the storm inside Elara. "Are you sure about this?" Elara whispered, glancing at the cliffs below, where the lake shimmered with the same silver glow that had haunted her dreams for nights. Rowan's lips curved in that familiar, dangerous smile. "Completely. If we're going to understand your fire, and the prophecy, we have to see it in its natural rhythm. The moonlit convergence only happens when the twin flames are near. Tonight is our chance." Elara swallowed. She had read the prophecy in fragments, fireborn and twin flames, energy intertwined, magic so potent it could either save or consume. She had not expected to face it so soon, or so intimately. The clearing they reached was empty, save for a ring of standing stones etched with runes that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The air vibrated with anticipation, humming in tandem with Elara's heartbeat. She stepped forward, instinctively extending her hands as the fire within her responded to the moon, the stones, and Rowan's nearness. Rowan moved beside her, mirroring her stance, energy coiling around her in a pulse that matched Elara's. For a moment, they simply breathed, feeling the hum of the convergence building, an unseen current connecting them, tugging at their magic, their bodies, their awareness. "You feel it, don't you?" Rowan whispered. "The pull. The rhythm. It's not just the magic, it's us." Elara's throat tightened. She nodded, feeling the fire pulse faster, winding around her chest, twisting and responding to Rowan's energy. The air shimmered, currents of silver light rising from the standing stones, curling toward them like tendrils. The convergence had begun. Then the trial started. The ground beneath their feet shifted, and the currents of magic coiled into tangible forms, shadows, flickering images of fire, water, wind, and stone. They were tests, ancient manifestations of the elements, but also more, echoes of those who had attempted the moonlit convergence before, some triumphant, some consumed. Elara's first instinct was to strike, fire leaping from her palms, blazing arcs of gold into the shadows. Rowan moved beside her, hands tracing protective sigils, guiding the fire, shaping it, turning what could have been destructive chaos into harmony. "You have to let it flow," Rowan said quietly, brushing against Elara's arm. "Trust it. Trust me." The fire pulsed, responding to Rowan's touch, entwining with the currents in ways Elara had never imagined possible. Together, they shaped the energy, bending it, folding it, coiling around the elemental shadows until the trial bowed before them instead of consuming them. Minutes passed like hours, each test pushing them harder, demanding more: control, focus, trust, and intuition. The wind howled, the stones trembled, and Elara's fire surged, bright and alive, responding to Rowan, to the moon, to the rhythm of the convergence itself. At one point, a shadow surged directly at Elara, a jagged, living darkness that threatened to consume her fire. She faltered, heart racing, until Rowan's hand found hers, grounding the energy instantly. "Together," Rowan said, voice low, intimate. "We're stronger together." Elara let the fire coil around them both, folding into the twin rhythm Rowan had invoked. The shadow dissipated, absorbed into the currents of energy swirling around them. The moonlight reflected off their hands, entwined, and the pull between them, magical and otherwise, became undeniable. When the convergence ended, the night returned to its quiet silver glow. The standing stones pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging the trial had been passed. Elara's chest heaved, her arms glowing faintly with residual energy, her hair damp with sweat and moonlight. Rowan stood close, breath mingling, eyes intense, almost too close. "You were incredible," Rowan murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Elara's forehead. "The fire, it responds to you, to me, to us. That bond is real." Elara felt her fire respond not with magic, but with something deeper, warmth, awareness, desire. She realized that Rowan wasn't just a guide, a rival, or a partner in magic. She was a part of the fire within her, tethered in ways that made her pulse race and her chest ache. I felt it," Elara whispered, voice trembling. "Everything. You. The fire. The stones, us." Rowan's lips curved into a small, tender smile. "Good. Then you understand what it means to be fireborn. To be twin flames. And to face the trials ahead, together." The wind swept across the cliffs, silver currents dancing across the water below, and Elara knew, with thrilling certainty, that the moonlit convergence had changed everything. Magic, trust, desire, and destiny were entwined now, theirs, and no one else's. The Festival of Shadows was unlike anything Elara had imagined. Aurelian Academy transformed every year, draping the halls and courtyards in shimmering enchantments, glowing lanterns that floated like fireflies, and illusions that danced across walls like living paintings. It was both celebration and trial, a test of skill, presence, and subtle influence, and tonight, Elara realized, it was a stage. Rowan led her through the winding corridors, past students dressed in robes that glimmered with light-bending magic. The academy smelled of incense, spell-laced food, and faint ozone from the wards that shimmered along the walls. Every corner pulsed with energy, as though the building itself was alive, watching, judging. "You'll need focus tonight," Rowan said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Elara's face. Her fingers lingered just long enough to make Elara's pulse spike. "The festival isn't just about skill. It's about perception, alliances, and knowing who to trust." Elara's stomach twisted. She had survived duels, trials, and the moonlit convergence, but this felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just tested on her magic, she was being watched, measured, and perhaps even manipulated. The first event was a duel exhibition, a test of skill and presence. Students faced off in pairs while the academy observed, magic weaving in arcs of color, sparks, and sound. Elara's heart raced when Seraphine appeared across the courtyard, platinum hair catching the lantern glow, eyes sharp and calculating. "You're here early," Seraphine said, voice low, almost taunting. "I wondered how long you'd last before showing up." Elara felt the familiar coil of fire in her chest, twisting around Rowan's proximity. "I'm ready," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. Rowan stepped beside her, hand brushing lightly against hers. The spark between them was electric, subtle but undeniable. "Together," she murmured, and the fire in Elara's veins responded instantly. The duel began. Spells and wards intertwined, magic twisting and sparking as both sides tested precision, control, and creativity. The crowd murmured, impressed, but Elara noticed the currents beneath the surface, subtle manipulations, hidden enchantments Seraphine had woven into the environment, testing them without their knowledge. Elara's pulse spiked. She focused, letting the fire within her respond not only to Rowan but to the illusions and hidden wards. Sparks twisted, reflecting light in unexpected ways, countering Seraphine's manipulations. The duel became a dance, not just of magic, but of trust, instinct, and intuition. By the end, neither claimed full victory, but the murmurs were clear. Fireborn Elara and her companion Rowan had survived, adapted, and impressed. The festival didn't end with dueling. The next event was a series of magical challenges, each designed to test creativity, perception, and courage. Students navigated enchanted mazes, solved riddles of elemental magic, and faced illusions that preyed on their deepest fears. Elara's fire responded in tandem with Rowan's, bending to the challenges in ways that neither could have managed alone. When an illusion of fire erupted in the courtyard, threatening to overwhelm them, Rowan's hand found hers, grounding both their magic. Together, they wove arcs of golden energy, controlling, redirecting, and ultimately extinguishing the flames. Every trial drew them closer. Every shared glance, touch, and whispered instruction strengthened the rhythm that pulsed between them, magical and emotional, a bond growing in fire and light. But the Festival of Shadows held deeper dangers than anyone realized. As they approached the final trial, a maze of shifting illusions, Elara felt a chill coil around her spine. The air itself whispered threats, the wards and the walls alive with subtle malice. "You feel that?" she whispered, gripping Rowan's hand tightly. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Yes. The Academy isn't just observing tonight. Someone's testing us, outside of the trials." Emerging from the shadows, Seraphine smiled coldly, but there was something sharper now, a latent warning in her stance. "Enjoy the festival while you can," she said, voice low, almost venomous. "The real test begins soon." Elara's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from fire, and from Rowan's steady presence beside her. She realized, fully, that this festival had been more than spectacle. It had been preparation, observation, and a subtle escalation of the rivalry that now defined her every step. Rowan leaned close, hand brushing hers again, and the pull between them was undeniable, charged with magic, adrenaline, and something deeply intimate. "Whatever comes next," Rowan whispered, "we face it together. Always." Elara nodded, fire coiling in her veins, heart racing, aware that tonight had revealed more than just skill. It had revealed connection, trust, and a bond that could not be ignored, a bond that would shape every challenge yet to come. The Academy's corridors were quiet after the Festival of Shadows, but the silence was deceptive. Aurelian's walls seemed to hum faintly, echoing whispers of magic that had witnessed centuries of ambition, betrayal, and power. Elara walked beside Rowan, her pulse still racing from the night's events, fire coiling restlessly in her veins. "Where are we going?" she asked softly, voice low, wary of anyone overhearing. Rowan's eyes glinted, a mixture of excitement and caution. "There's a library few students know about," she said, turning a corner that led them past wards and silent sentries. "The Library of Thorns. It's dangerous. Not because it will attack you, but because it will show you truths you might not be ready for. Knowledge, power, history, all hidden for a reason." Elara swallowed. She had already seen the whispering wards, survived the moonlit convergence, and faced Seraphine's manipulations. But something about the Library of Thorns called to her, an unrelenting pull she couldn't resist. The entrance was concealed behind a tapestry of twisting vines and thorned roses that shimmered faintly in moonlight. Rowan's fingers traced a glyph along the wall, and the thorns shivered, parting to reveal a narrow staircase winding downward into darkness. Elara hesitated. "This feels alive." Rowan's smile was reassuring. "It is. And it will respond to us. Come on." The library itself was breathtaking and terrifying. Shelves of blackened wood stretched toward a vaulted ceiling veined with silver runes, each book bound in materials Elara couldn't name. The air smelled of old parchment, iron, and faint ozone, and a low hum vibrated through the floor, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Books floated gently, opening on their own, revealing pages of spells, histories, and warnings. Some glowed faintly with energy, others radiated a chill that made her spine prickle. "This place," Elara breathed, eyes wide. "It's alive." Rowan nodded. "It's knowledge itself. It doesn't just record magic, it tests it. Your intention matters here. Curiosity can be as dangerous as ambition." Elara stepped forward, fire humming within her, instinctively responding to the energy in the room. A single book drifted toward her, opening midair. Its pages glowed with silver runes, spiraling into shapes that shifted and danced. Twin flames. Fireborn. Bond beyond life. Elara's heart skipped. She felt the pull again, stronger, insistent. Rowan stepped beside her, hand brushing hers lightly. The fire within her twisted, responding to Rowan, to the library, and to the words themselves. "This is it," Rowan whispered. "This is part of what the prophecy meant. The library shows the path, and the consequences. You need to see both." The pages revealed Fireborn who had bonded with twin flames before, some achieving power beyond imagining, others destroyed by desire, ambition, or betrayal. Elara's pulse quickened with a mixture of awe and fear. Every story, every spark of magic, seemed to echo her own potential. Rowan leaned close, her hand brushing Elara's, grounding her as the fire surged. "The library doesn't lie," she murmured. "But it also doesn't protect. Knowledge is dangerous, especially when it involves what we are." Elara's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but Rowan's gaze held her, intense, intimate, and patient. The fire in her veins pulsed, responding to the connection between them, the bond forming stronger with every shared heartbeat. "This power," Elara whispered. "It's more than I imagined. I don't know if I can control it." Rowan's thumb brushed against her hand. "You already are. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. You're not alone in this, and the library knows it. It will respond to us both, if we let it." Elara nodded, swallowing hard. She reached toward the pages again, letting the fire within her respond not with recklessness, but with control, merging with Rowan's presence, feeling the bond between them as clearly as the hum of magic in the library itself. A sudden shiver passed through the room, as if the library itself was testing them. Shadows twisted along the shelves, tendrils of energy reacting to their combined magic. Elara's fire flared, bright and controlled, and Rowan's magic wove seamlessly with hers. Together, they created a harmony the library seemed to acknowledge, quieting the shadows and allowing the knowledge to settle before them. Elara realized something then, in the stillness of the Library of Thorns. Rowan was no longer just a partner or guide. She was part of the fire that defined her, part of the bond that shaped her power, and perhaps the only person who could walk the path ahead with her safely. And the library, ancient and observing, seemed to approve. The Hall of Mirrors at Aurelian Academy was said to be one of the most dangerous places in the entire school. Not because of the magic alone, but because it reflected more than appearances. It reflected truth, desire, fear, and every hidden fragment of the soul. Few students dared enter willingly, and even fewer returned without being changed. Elara followed Rowan through the narrow corridor leading to the hall, the air thick with anticipation. Silver light glimmered faintly along the edges of the arched doorway ahead, and the scent of ozone and ancient magic prickled at her senses. "You sure about this?" Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fire coiled inside her chest, restless, impatient, eager to act, to react, to survive. Rowan's hand brushed hers lightly. "I'll be with you," she said softly, her presence grounding Elara's nerves. "The hall only challenges what you're willing to face. Together, we can handle it." Elara swallowed, nodding, and they stepped into the hall. Inside, mirrors stretched infinitely in every direction. Some reflected their bodies accurately, others twisted their forms, elongating limbs, shrinking torsos, making them appear as distorted visions of themselves. The air vibrated with a low hum, the magic alive and observant. At first, the reflections were harmless. Then they began to shift. Elara saw herself as a frightened girl from Brackenmere, standing alone in a field of fire. She saw herself as a destructive force, losing control, hurting those she loved. She saw Rowan, but not the Rowan who stood beside her, a version distant, cold, disappointed, a mirror of fear rather than desire. The fire within her surged, responding to the panic, and for the first time in weeks, Elara felt the weight of her own power, not just the thrill, but the danger, the responsibility, the truth that her magic could consume as easily as protect. Rowan's hand tightened over hers. Focus, she murmured. It's not real. Only the part you let it touch. Breathe, Elara. Trust me, trust us. Elara closed her eyes, inhaled, and felt the rhythm of Rowan's presence. The fire within her responded, controlled, coiling around them both, pushing back against the illusions. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward, and the mirrors shifted in response, dissolving the visions of fear and doubt. Then a new reflection appeared, Seraphine, smirking, her platinum hair gleaming, eyes like ice. You think you've grown, the reflection said, voice layered, echoing. This is only the beginning. You are fireborn, yes, but alone, fire burns out quickly. Elara's pulse spiked, the fire twisting at the edges of her control. Rowan's fingers found hers, grounding the energy, and together they responded. Not alone, Rowan whispered. Together. Always. The mirrors twisted again, this time showing not threats or fears, but possibilities, visions of Rowan and Elara side by side, wielding fire and magic in harmony, facing danger, surviving, and thriving together. The reflections glimmered with potential, showing power intertwined with trust, desire, and love. Elara felt the fire in her veins respond like never before. Not wild, not untamed, but alive with rhythm, aware of Rowan, aware of herself. She realized, with breathtaking clarity, that her strength did not come from fire alone, it came from connection, trust, and the bond she shared with Rowan. The final test arrived as a surge of energy erupted from the center of the hall, shadows twisting and converging into a shape both familiar and threatening. It was Seraphine, or a reflection of her, magnified, a dark echo that seemed to embody all of Elara's doubts and rivalries. Control it, Rowan urged, eyes blazing, hand brushing hers. We are stronger together. Fire and flame, remember? Elara focused, letting her fire respond not in anger, but in rhythm, intertwining with Rowan's energy. The shadows twisted and surged, but slowly, inexorably, they were drawn into the light of their combined power. Sparks leapt across the hall, mirrors shimmering, the echoes of Seraphine's image dissolving into harmless reflection. When it ended, the hall fell silent. Only the low hum of magic remained, and the faint shimmer of mirrors reflecting their true selves, united, powerful, unbroken. The fire did not sleep anymore. Elara felt it even before she opened her eyes, low and restless, moving through her chest like a second heartbeat. It had changed since the convergence. It no longer waited for her to summon it. It listened. It watched. Sometimes, it answered before she spoke. She lay still in the narrow bed of her tower room, dawn bleeding pale gold through the arched windows, and tried to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. Rowan had left before sunrise. That absence burned more sharply than the magic. Elara sat up, fingers curling into the blanket, the memory of Rowan's touch still warm against her wrist from the night before, how they had stood on opposite sides of the tower balcony, not touching, yet unable to move apart. How Rowan had looked at her as if she were something both sacred and terrifying. You're changing, Rowan had said softly. So are you, Elara had replied. Neither of them had smiled. By midday, the academy was humming with rumor. Students whispered in stairwells and dining halls, glancing at Elara as she passed. The Moonward trial had not been meant to be witnessed. The surge of power that had cracked the ancient stone had not been meant to echo beyond the forest. And yet it had. Seraphine watched her openly now. In the hall of echoed light, where students practiced controlled spellcasting beneath floating mirrors, Seraphine leaned against a column of white marble, dark robes immaculate, eyes sharp with something like anticipation. The council is afraid of you, she said when Elara passed too close. Elara didn't slow. They should be afraid of what you're planning. Seraphine smiled. Careful. Fire that speaks too boldly tends to be extinguished. The mirrors above them shuddered. Not from Seraphine's magic, but from Elara's restraint. That evening, Rowan summoned her to the lower wards. Not the whispering wards this time, but deeper. Older. The air beneath the academy was colder, heavier, threaded with power that pressed against the bones. These halls were unlit, the stone absorbing light rather than reflecting it, runes carved so deeply they looked like scars. Rowan stopped before a sealed archway. "You don't have to go any further," she said. Elara met her gaze. "You didn't bring me here to turn back." Rowan exhaled slowly. "What's behind this door isn't a lesson. It's a truth. One the Academy has buried for centuries." She placed her palm against the stone. The runes flared, not in warning, but recognition. The door opened. Inside was a chamber shaped like a heart. Not metaphorically. Literally. Veins of glowing magic ran through the walls, pulsing, converging at a crystalline core suspended in the air. The heat here was immense, not scorching but alive, breathing. Elara staggered as the fire inside her surged in answer. "This is the Ember Vault," Rowan said. "The source the Academy was built around. The first flame." Elara's voice shook. "It's calling me." "Yes." Rowan turned to face her fully now, something raw in her expression. "Because it was never meant to be locked away. It was meant to be bonded." Elara's heart pounded. "Bonded to who?" Rowan swallowed. "To the one who carries fire not as a weapon, but as a choice." The core pulsed brighter. And then the chamber spoke. Not in words, but in memory. Elara saw flashes, ancient women standing in circles of flame, hands clasped, magic flowing between them not as dominance but devotion. Fire used to heal. To protect. To bind hearts to purpose. And then, fear. Councils. Control. The flames sealed away when it could no longer be owned. Tears burned Elara's eyes. "They're afraid because they can't command it," she whispered. Rowan nodded. "And they're afraid of us because you don't stand alone." The word "us" landed between them, fragile and blazing. Footsteps echoed. Seraphine emerged from the shadows, slow applause cutting through the chamber. "How touching," she said. "The truth revealed at last." Rowan spun. "You followed us." "Of course," Seraphine replied. "You always were terrible at hiding what matters to you." Her gaze flicked to Elara. "Do you know what happens if you bond with it?" Elara didn't look away. "Tell me." Seraphine's smile was thin. "You become ungovernable." The core flared violently. "You will never belong to the Academy again," Seraphine continued. "Never be safe. Never be forgiven." Rowan stepped closer to Elara, their shoulders nearly touching. "Or," she said quietly, "you become something they can't erase." The fire roared. The choice pressed down on Elara, not between light and dark, but between fear and truth. Between silence and becoming. She reached out. The flame did not consume her. It welcomed her. When the light faded, the Ember Vault was quiet. Elara stood at its center, fire woven into her like breath, like blood. She felt larger, not in power, but in clarity. Rowan was staring at her like she was seeing the future. Seraphine's expression had hardened into something dangerous. "This changes everything," she said. Elara met her gaze, steady and unafraid. "Yes," she said. "It does." Rowan took Elara's hand, this time without hesitation. And the Academy, deep above them, shuddered as if it had finally realized. The fire had chosen. The Academy did not explode. It tightened. By morning, Aurelian felt different, not louder, not brighter, but watchful. The corridors seemed narrower, the staircases steeper, the air itself drawn taut as if waiting for something to snap. Elara felt it immediately. The fire inside her, now bound and awake, pressed gently against her ribs, aware of every ward, every gaze, every lie. Rowan walked beside her, fingers brushing Elara's knuckles whenever the silence grew too heavy. They did not speak. They didn't need to. What had been chosen beneath the Academy could not be undone by words. The summons came before first bell. 3 chimes. Low. Final. The council chamber. The chamber was circular, carved from moonstone veined with silver, its ceiling open to the sky despite the storm clouds gathering above. 7 seats formed a ring around a central sigil etched into the floor, containment magic layered so densely it hummed. Elara stepped onto the sigil and felt the wards push back. Not painfully. Cautiously. Rowan moved to follow. "No," said Archwarden Kalis, her voice sharp as cut glass. "Only the bearer stands within." Rowan's jaw tightened. Elara squeezed her hand once before stepping forward alone. The sigil flared. "You have violated ancient restriction," Kalis continued. "Entered a sealed vault. Bound yourself to a prohibited source." Elara lifted her chin. "You buried it because you couldn't control it." A murmur rippled through the council. Seraphine sat among them now, no longer lurking in shadow. Her eyes flicked briefly to Elara, cold, assessing. "You risk destabilizing the academy," Seraphine said. "And every student within it." Elara's voice was steady. "Fire doesn't destroy what it understands." "And do you understand it?" Kalis demanded. The fire stirred, not in anger, but certainty. "Yes." The sigil dimmed. Punishment was not immediate. It was worse. Restriction. Elara's access to advanced halls revoked. Her lessons reassigned. Her movements monitored. The message was clear: you may exist, but not freely. Rowan found her that night on the west battlements, wind whipping her hair loose, the sky heavy with rain. "They're isolating you," Rowan said quietly. "They're afraid," Elara replied. "And fear always tries to make itself small." Rowan stepped closer. "They warned me too." Elara turned. "Warned you of what?" "Of standing with you." The words landed heavier than any threat. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unspoken. Then Rowan reached out, cupping Elara's face, thumb warm against her cheek despite the cold. "I won't step back," she said. "I don't care what they take from me." Elara's breath caught. "Rowan." "I choose you," Rowan said simply. "Not the academy. Not safety. You." The fire inside Elara surged, not wild, not consuming, but radiant. She leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation. Their lips met under the storm-dark sky, gentle at first, then deeper, as if the world itself had been holding its breath for this moment. Magic rippled outward, unseen but felt, a pulse through the battlements, the stone, the wards. Above them, thunder rolled. Below them, the academy noticed. The backlash was swift. By morning, the council had acted. Rowan was removed from her mentorship post. Publicly. Elara was barred from the conclave. Publicly. And the whispers turned sharp. Dangerous. Unstable. Unnatural. Elara stood in the great hall as eyes followed her, some fearful, some awed, some quietly defiant. She did not lower her gaze. Seraphine approached her near the doors, voice low. "You've made yourself a symbol." Elara met her stare. "So have you." Seraphine smiled without warmth. "Symbols burn. Only if they stand alone," Elara replied. Across the hall, Rowan waited. And when Elara walked toward her, openly, unafraid, something shifted. Not in the council. In the students. Heads lifted. Whispers changed tone. A hand reached out. Then another. Not fire. Not rebellion. Solidarity. That night, Elara lay awake, Rowan's arm draped across her waist, the storm finally breaking overhead. The fire inside her was calm, steady, certain. "They'll push harder," Rowan murmured. Elara nodded. "Let them." She turned to face Rowan, forehead resting against hers. "Fire doesn't beg for permission." Rowan smiled softly. Neither does love. Above them, lightning split the sky. And somewhere deep within the academy, ancient wards shifted, not in resistance, but recognition. The world had pushed back. And found something pushing harder. The council did not ask for obedience. They demanded it. By dawn, sigils burned above every entrance to the academy, containment glyphs disguised as protection. Students were confined to their towers. Lessons were suspended. The bells rang not for learning, but for order. Elara felt the wards tighten like a hand closing around a throat. "They're sealing the academy," Rowan said, pacing the length of the chamber they had been assigned. "Not imprisoned, not yet, but watched. If they finish aligning the outer ring, they'll be able to isolate you completely." Elara sat on the edge of the bed, fire pulsing low and steady beneath her skin. "They think lines stop change." Rowan stopped in front of her. "This isn't about lines. It's about fear hardening into law." A knock sounded. Not a knock, a command. Seraphine entered flanked by 2 wardens, her presence precise, composed, lethal in its restraint. "The council has reached a decision," she said. "You will stand down, Elara Vale. The Ember bond will be suppressed. Permanently." Rowan stepped forward. "You can't sever a living bond." Seraphine's gaze flicked to her. "We can bury it. Like we buried every other inconvenient truth." Elara rose slowly. The fire answered, not flaring, but focusing. "And if I refuse?" Seraphine met her eyes. "Then we draw a line." They brought her to the conclave's circle at dusk. Not hidden. Not private. Every student who could stand was summoned. The circle was carved into the highest terrace of the academy, overlooking the valley below. Ancient pylons ringed the space, etched with suppression runes older than the school itself. Elara stood at the center. Rowan was held at the edge. That was the cruelty of it. "You may speak," Kalis announced. "One last time." Elara looked around the circle, at faces frightened and fierce, curious and defiant. At Rowan, standing rigid, eyes blazing. "This academy was built on fire," Elara said. Her voice carried without magic. Not destruction. Choice. Devotion. Power shared, not owned. The pylons hummed louder. "You taught us magic was truth," she continued. "But truth scares you when it won't kneel." A tremor rippled through the stone. "Enough," Seraphine said sharply. "Bind her." The pylons flared. Pain lanced through Elara as the runes activated, not burning, but pressing, trying to compress something vast into something manageable. Rowan cried out. "Stop." The fire surged, not in rage, but in refusal. It did not attack the wards. It passed through them. The pylons cracked. Gasps tore through the crowd. Elara fell to one knee, breath ragged, but the flame did not dim. It rose. And then someone stepped forward. A student. Then another. Hands clasped. Voices raised, not in spells, but in presence. They stood between Elara and the pylons. "This isn't protection," one said. "This is control," another added. The wards faltered. Rowan broke free. She crossed the circle and knelt beside Elara, pressing her forehead to Elara's temple, grounding her, anchoring the fire. "I'm here," Rowan whispered. "I won't let them break you." The magic changed. Not louder. Stronger. Shared. The pylons shattered. Stone split. The line the council had drawn burned away. Silence followed. Heavy. Awed. Seraphine stared, something like disbelief cracking her composure. "You've crossed into rebellion." Elara stood, steadied by Rowan's hand. "No," she said. "You have." She turned to the students. "This academy can still be home. But not like this. The fire settled, not consuming, not ruling, but waiting. A choice extended outward. Some stepped back. Others stepped forward. Enough. That night, the council chambers stood dark. No decree was issued. No victory declared. Only the knowledge that power had shifted, and could not be forced back into silence. Elara and Rowan stood together on the terrace long after the crowd dispersed, the valley below lit with scattered lanterns. "They'll come for you," Rowan said softly. Elara nodded. "They'll try." Rowan squeezed her hand. "Then we stop running." Elara leaned into her, fire warm and steady, heart unafraid. "They drew a line," she said. "And you burned it," Rowan replied. Elara smiled, fierce and bright. "No," she said. "We stepped over it." Morning did not arrive gently. The academy woke as if from a fevered dream, stone cracked in places no one spoke of aloud, wards humming unevenly, corridors echoing with a new kind of quiet. Not fear. Uncertainty. Elara stood at the window of the West Tower, watching students move below in small clusters, talking in low voices. The fire inside her was subdued now, not dimmed, but tempered, like embers after a blaze. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, eyes tired but clear. "The council convened at dawn," she said. "Without Seraphine." Elara turned. "She didn't attend?" Rowan shook her head. "No. And that's worse. The cost came in pieces. Some instructors resigned by midday. Others vanished from their posts entirely, choosing distance over choosing sides. Classes resumed unevenly, magic cautious and constrained, as if the academy itself were testing its own stability. Elara walked openly now. Not as a rebel, but not as a student either. Something in between. Something undefined. Not everyone met her gaze with approval. A girl she barely knew flinched when Elara passed. A boy whispered, unbound, like it was a curse. Elara absorbed it all in silence. Later, she sat in the ember vault with Rowan, the chamber quiet, the crystal core pulsing slowly, like a sleeping heart. "I never wanted this," Elara said at last. "To fracture everything." Rowan crouched beside her. "Fire reveals fault lines. It doesn't create them." Elara swallowed. "What if what survives isn't better?" Rowan reached for her hands. "Then we keep choosing better." Again and again. The fire stirred in agreement. They found Seraphine at dusk. Not hiding. Waiting. She stood at the edge of the academy grounds, beyond the outer wards, cloak drawn tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You could have ruled," Seraphine said without turning. "They would have followed you eventually." Elara stepped forward, Rowan beside her. "I don't want followers." Seraphine finally faced them. There was no fury now. Only exhaustion. "Then you'll be hunted." Rowan's voice was steady. "By who?" "By systems that survive on fear," Seraphine replied. "By councils yet unborn." Elara met her gaze. "Then they'll have to change too." For a moment, Seraphine looked almost relieved. "Fire always thinks it's the end," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's only the beginning." She turned and walked into the dusk. They did not follow. That night, the academy held its breath. Students gathered in halls and towers, not to plan, not to protest, but to talk. Stories were exchanged. Old rules questioned. New possibilities named. Elara lay with Rowan beneath a window open to the stars, Rowan's fingers tracing slow, absent patterns along her arm. "What happens now?" Rowan asked. Elara considered the question carefully. "We rebuild. But not alone." Rowan smiled softly. "Good. I'm terrible at being alone." Elara laughed, a sound that felt like survival. She turned, pressing her forehead to Rowan's. Whatever comes, thank you for choosing me. Rowan kissed her, slow, certain, unafraid. There was never a question. Outside, the academy's wards adjusted, rethreading themselves not into cages, but into something more like scaffolding. Support. Later, as Elara drifted towards sleep, the fire whispered, not of war, not of destiny, but of continuity. Of hands joined across generations. Of love that did not burn out, but burned on. Years later, the academy still smelled of stone and rain. That was the first thing Elara noticed when she returned, not the rebuilt towers, not the softened wards, not the students laughing where fear once lived, but the familiar scent rising from the ground after a storm. Some things, she thought, were too honest to change. Rowan walked beside her, fingers laced with Elara's, their steps slower now but no less certain. You're smiling, Rowan said. Elara didn't look away from the courtyard. I was remembering the first time I stood here and thought the walls were watching me. They were, Rowan replied. They just didn't know why yet. They passed beneath the archway where the conclave circle had once burned with conflict. It had been transformed, not erased, but reimagined. The pylons were gone. In their place stood young trees, their leaves catching the light, roots woven into the stone. Choice, not containment. A group of students paused as Elara and Rowan passed. One of them, barely more than a child, recognized them and straightened, eyes bright with something like awe. Are you really the ones who? Elara smiled gently. We're just people who stayed. That answer seemed to satisfy her. They did not live at the academy anymore. Their home lay beyond the valley, where the land opened into wild meadows and the fire ran quieter, deeper. Elara taught when asked. Rowan wrote, mentored, listened. Neither sought titles. That, perhaps, was their greatest defiance. Inside the ember vault, the crystal core still pulsed, but it no longer belonged to one bearer. It responded to those who came with open hands, not hungry ones. Fire shared learned how to endure. Rowan paused at the threshold. Do you ever miss it? She asked softly. Being at the center of everything? Elara considered. No. I like being part of it. Rowan smiled. I always knew you would. That evening, they climbed the western ridge as the sun dipped low, sky burning gold and violet. Wind tugged at Rowan's hair, threaded with silver now. Elara watched her the way she always had, as if love were a practice, not a possession. Do you think they'll remember us? Rowan asked. Elara shook her head. Not the way we were. Rowan hummed thoughtfully. Good. They sat together as the stars emerged, fireflies flickering like scattered sparks below. Stories change, Elara continued. That's how they survive. Rowan leaned her head on Elara's shoulder. And love? Elara kissed the top of her head. Love becomes a path. If you walk it long enough, others follow. Later, much later, a child would ask why the academy no longer feared fire. And someone would answer. Because once, two women chose truth over obedience. Because they loved without permission. Because they taught the world that power shared does not diminish, it multiplies. Elara and Rowan would not hear that story told. They would be too busy living. But somewhere, in stone and soil and memory, the fire would still be warm. Still listening. Still choosing. I was not there when the fire chose her. I was not there when the wards broke, or when the academy learned how to breathe again. By the time I arrived, the stones were calm, the halls wide with light, the magic gentle in the way old things are gentle, because they have survived. But some stories live in the walls. You can hear them if you walk slowly. They taught us that on the first day. Not spells. Not discipline. Listening. They said the academy was once afraid of fire. That it tried to lock it away, name it dangerous, pretend it could be owned. They said two women changed that, not with war, not with conquest, but by refusing to let love be treated as a threat. We are not taught their names first. We are taught their choice. In the West Garden, where the old conclave circle once stood, there is a plaque worn smooth by weather and hands. It does not list victories. It does not mark a battle. It says, "What is shared endures." I sit there sometimes when the lessons grow heavy. When I am afraid of the power in my chest, or the truth in my heart. The fireflies gather at dusk, drifting low over the grass, and I imagine them as sparks, leftovers from something ancient and kind. They say the women lived beyond the valley. They say they argued sometimes. That they laughed easily. That they refused titles, even when offered. That they believed the greatest magic was staying. When I asked my mentor if the stories were true, she smiled. "They are," she said. "But not in the way legends are true." "How then?" I asked. She touched my sternum, gently, where my own magic stirs. "They're true because you're here. Because you don't have to ask permission to become. Tonight, the fire inside me is quiet. Not gone. Waiting. And somewhere, whether in memory or soil or starlight, I like to think the fire that chose them still listens. Still warms. Still believes in what survives. The fire didn't burn the world down, it taught it how to stay warm.